I was 19 years old in 2010 and living in a crummy neighborhood in Montgomery, Alabama. It was the kind of place, like most of Alabama, where opportunities were limited and dreams were just dreams. I didn't go away to college. I was attending the city community college, a bus ride from my house, because it was all my parents could afford. My best friend from high school, Daniel, had moved to Birmingham to attend the University of Alabama. He rented a small apartment just off campus with a roommate. I frequently visited him since Birmingham was only about an hour and a half away. Daniel invited me to spend the night at his place one weekend, so I decided to make the trip in my trusty 2004 Ford Ranger pickup truck. The Ranger was never a trustworthy or reliable truck, even when it was new. Mine, with 325,000 miles on it, was ready for the junkyard. The gas gauge didn't even work. To gauge my fuel levels, I had to track the mileage and remember when I last filled up. I set out on Highway 65, a straight shot from Montgomery to Birmingham, with the sun hanging low in the sky around 3 p.m. on a Friday. The road was practically empty, and I had a good time on the highway. I reached Daniel's place at a reasonable hour, where we cooked some hamburgers on his grill before heading out for the night. His roommate joined us, and the three of us headed to an outdoor amphitheater where a band was playing with free entry. That night was a blur of laughter and camaraderie. We returned to Daniel's apartment around 2 a.m. after eating at a Waffle House. I settled in for the night, crashing on the couch. The following day started much the same, but things took a turn for the worse as the hours passed. Daniel and his roommate began arguing, and as the morning passed, their dispute escalated. The tension in the apartment became palpable, and I started feeling uncomfortable and out of place. By evening, I decided it was time to make my exit. I said my goodbyes, hoping that Daniel and his roommate would find a way to resolve their issues. I knew it was time to head back home. It was late at night, perhaps around midnight, when I hit the deserted Highway 65 for my journey home. I was driving faster than usual, for my pickup at least. Suddenly, the engine began sputtering. I felt my heart drop as I realized I had forgotten to fill up the gas tank. I tried to slow down, but it was too late. The engine died. I pulled to the side of the road, trying to restart the truck, but it was futile. Panic set in as I reached for my cell phone, which was just as unreliable as my truck, and tried to get a signal. No luck. I couldn't even call for help. Desperation forced me to turn on my hazard lights and hope that a good Samaritan would pass by. Minutes felt like hours as I sat there, anxiously waiting the occasional car zoom past me, ignoring my plight. After what felt like an eternity, a set of headlights approached. I waved my arms in desperation, hoping this driver would stop. To my dismay, the car sped past me, paying no attention. This happened again after another agonizing 10 minutes. I began to lose hope. I should sleep in my truck and wait for the sun to rise before seeking assistance. That seemed like the safest course of action. I climbed back into my truck, removed the key from the ignition to save the battery, and reclined my seat in preparation for an uncomfortable night's sleep. As I drifted off to sleep, a sound behind me startled me awake, a car door closing. I peered into the rearview mirror and saw a vehicle pull up behind me. Its headlights turned off. I turned to get a better look, but couldn't see anyone inside or outside the truck. Maybe they'd pulled over to offer help. I got out of my truck and called out, "Hello?" but received no response. I cautiously approached the truck, trying to confirm whether anyone was inside. As I neared, I noticed it was a large pickup, but there was still no sign of anyone. Perplexed and increasingly wary, I returned to my truck. Something felt off about the situation. I looked towards the trees on the roadside, thinking someone might be there taking care of their business. I returned to my truck, locked the doors, and decided to wait it out, feeling that it was too risky to approach the mysterious vehicle in the dark. As I settled in for a long night, a tap on my window jolted me back to alertness. I jumped and my heart pounded as I peered out to see a man looking down at me with a chilling smile. I hesitated for a moment before lowering my window slightly. "Hey," I said, my voice trembling. "I ran out of gas." The man smiled and then said something that sent chills down my spine. "That sure is bad news out here this time of night. Step out and give me a hand with this real quick." Confused and still half asleep, I assumed he meant he needed help with a gas jug or some other kind of assistance. I stepped out of my truck without realizing the danger and shut the door behind me. I was not prepared for what happened next. The man stood there, much taller than me, still grinning. "I need you to give me your wallet." It took a moment for his words to sink in. I was just a broke college student driving a beat-up pickup truck. I couldn't afford to lose my phone or the little cash I had on me. Panic surged through me, and I made a snap decision. I turned and bolted towards the trees, my heart pounding. I was lean and fast, and fear lent wings to my feet. As I weaved through the trees, I glanced back and saw the man chasing after me. I ran erratically in every direction, hoping to lose him. Finally, I crouched behind a massive rock, gasping for breath, my heart racing. I strained to listen, and after a while, I thought I had lost him. Quietly, I made my way back to the highway. It felt like hours had passed, and I stayed hidden in the woods the entire time. When I returned to my truck, the pickup truck that had been parked behind me was gone. My truck's doors were open, and a sense of violation washed over me. I discovered that my glove box had been ransacked and its contents were scattered. Anything remotely valuable had been taken. My favorite winter coat, which I had left in the truck, was gone too. I knew there was something in its pocket, but I couldn't remember what. Dread filled me as I realized how close I had come to a potentially dangerous situation. I finally managed to flag down another car that helped me reach the nearest gas station. There, I bought a fuel can and filled it with gas. The kind stranger drove me back to my truck, where I filled the tank just enough to make it to the gas station. I made the journey home without further incident, feeling both shaken and fortunate. This chilling nightmare was a stark reminder of not-so-nice people who prey on the vulnerable. When I was 18, I was reckless and impatient. I was that gal on the road who would honk at slow drivers and cut people off just for fun. I was immature, naive, and self-centered. Looking back now, I cringe at my younger self's behavior. I've learned a lot since then. Experience is only sometimes a kind teacher. As an 18-year-old, I drove a lot for someone my age. I attended school 5.5 hours away from Houston in New Orleans at Loyola University, and no matter which day of the week, traffic always turned the last leg of the journey into a nightmare. So I tried driving home at night during school breaks to avoid the highway crawl. It turned a 7-hour trip into a manageable 5-hour trip. This story unfolded at the beginning of winter break, right after the fall semester. My friends had all left home on the same day. I, however, waited until later in the night to hit the road because, as I've mentioned, I despised traffic more than anything else. At the time, I drove a battered old Dodge Charger that I would routinely push to its limits. I was notorious for driving it with the fuel gauge hovering perilously close to empty. People who rode with me often commented on it, expressing disbelief as the needle dipped into the E red line. Each time I'd reassure them that the car had at least another 30 miles left after the needle had emptied. As it turned out, one frightful night would prove me wrong. About an hour into my drive on the interstate, I noticed the needle firmly planted on E. Instead of checking the map for the nearest gas station, I pushed my luck, hoping to spot one of those familiar highway signs indicating fuel nearby. The car began making strange noises and chugging unexpectedly, and it dawned on me that I might have run out of gas this time. I took the first exit ramp, hoping it would lead me to a service center. Unfortunately, the exit was shrouded in darkness, devoid of streetlights, with only a swamp on either side. Fearful of losing my speed and not knowing if I had enough gas to reach a station, I raced through the stop sign at the end of the ramp and made a sharp turn onto the intersecting road. Another unlit road surrounded by more swamps. My situation grew increasingly dire as the car eventually sputtered to a halt, the engine dying. I glanced at my phone, only to find there were no bars. My T-Mobile reception, or lack thereof, had left me stranded in the middle of nowhere. In a moment of panic, I dialed 911, naively assuming that emergency services worked even without reception. Of course, the call failed, leaving me terrified and clueless about what to do next. I switched on my hazard lights and waited, hoping someone would pass by. It felt like an eternity before I saw headlights approaching from the distance. As the vehicle drew closer, I flashed my headlights in distress. The vehicle passed me, but then made a U-turn, pulling up behind me on the shoulder. I couldn't discern who was getting out of the car, and I was an 18-year-old, feeling defenseless in the darkness. I cautiously rolled down the window just a fraction as a man approached my car. He explained that he was from Houston and offered to give me a ride to the nearest gas station. He had a bald head and glasses, and for some inexplicable reason, he seemed somewhat trustworthy. I had no other options, so I reluctantly accepted his offer. Exiting my car, I followed him to his black Chevrolet Malibu, which looked to be around a 2010 model. A strange and unpleasant smell permeated his vehicle, though I couldn't quite place its source. He executed another U-turn and began driving back in the direction he'd come from, while maintaining an incessant stream of conversation. He asked me about where I was from and other mundane questions. I answered honestly, explaining that I was returning home from school. He mentioned that he lived in the area and rarely saw travelers taking this exit for this out-of-the-way town. As we entered a town, I heard strange sounds emanating from the back of the vehicle. Initially, I thought it might be road bumps or a loose object in the trunk. At the first stoplight, the creep stopped, waiting for the light to turn green. As we waited, I heard a scream, unmistakable and chilling, coming from the trunk, followed by thuds and bangs. I stared at the man, and he met my gaze for a split second. It was all I needed to make up my mind. I unbuckled my seatbelt, flung open the car door, and sprinted away, all while he attempted to grab me and pull me back into the vehicle. Instead of pursuing me on foot, he rushed to close his passenger side door, and within seconds, I heard the sound of his engine as he sped away. Breathless and terrified, I dashed into a nearby diner and asked for help. The manager called the police. 2 patrolmen arrived shortly after, their response escalating as they heard my report of someone screaming from the trunk of a car. They gathered every detail I could provide about the man, the Chevrolet Malibu, and the location where he picked me up. They took off in pursuit, while a service center truck eventually arrived to take me to my car to fill my empty gas tank. To this day, I shudder when I recall that horrifying experience. It was undoubtedly the scariest moment in my life, leaving me profoundly shaken. I hope they found that man and the person in the trunk survived. For all I know, he might have been taking me to his home or some other destination. I was fortunate to have that brief opportunity to escape when that light turned red as we entered the town. I live with my boyfriend George in the outskirts of Kalamazoo, Michigan, nestled in the heart of the countryside. Life here is relaxed, and we love the leisurely pace, matching the serene rural surroundings. Seldom is there any kind of trouble. We occasionally get odd characters passing through our tranquil community, but things usually remain uneventful. I'm an emergency room nurse, so my work schedule varies between day and night shifts at Kalamazoo's Bronson Methodist Hospital. The incident I'm about to recount occurred after one of those late night shifts, around 3 a.m. Exhausted and starved after my shift, I longed to return to the comfort of our home to enjoy a late dinner with George and to sleep. I pulled into a gas station as my car was low on gas and insufficient to get home. I also had to use the restroom rather desperately as well. I set the self-service pump and ran into the service center to use the toilet. I messaged George, "Getting gas, my phone battery's almost dead, see you soon." Inside the service center, I felt the gaze of a sketchy-looking man fixed upon me. I went into the restroom, and when I came out, he was gone, and I didn't give it another thought. I returned to my car, hung up the pump handle, and closed my gas cap. A peculiarly strong odor of gasoline hit me, which was not normal, and it made me uneasy. But I got into my car and my fatigue urged me to drive home. These rural roads at night twisted unpredictably. Deer were always a danger, and with my exhaustion from a long night of work, I drove cautiously. Then something strange happened. The needle on my gas gauge plummeted abruptly to E, accompanied by the glow of the low fuel warning light. Panic struck as I grappled with the situation. Not being a car mechanic, I couldn't fathom why my tank had emptied so quickly, especially after I'd just filled it. I initially suspected a glitch in the car's computer system. I attempted to restart the car, but the gauge stubbornly remained fixed at E. In a futile attempt, I tried to continue driving, only for the engine to sputter and chug one last time and die. My panic intensified as I realized I was stranded on a desolate road in the dead of night. I immediately called my boyfriend, praying that he'd pick up. In frantic tones, I questioned how the car could have run out of gas so soon after refueling. As I exited the car, the pungent smell of gasoline hit me, intensifying my anxiety. George, ever the calming presence, assured me he'd rush to my aid and contact our roadside assistance. However, a chilling thought emerged as I noticed a car approaching without headlights. It abruptly stopped, not far behind my stranded car. I couldn't help but recall the suspicious character from the gas station watching me when I went in to use the toilet. Trembling, I whispered my fears to George over the phone, speculating whether that creep had cut my fuel line or something. A notable shift occurred in George's tone as worry crept into his voice. He acknowledged that someone may have tampered with my car, suggesting they cut the fuel line. I understood the possibility was confirmed by the urgency in his voice. Without hesitation, I took my keys from the ignition, jumped from the car, clicked the door locks, and ran into the trees to hide and gather my wits. With my phone barely clinging to its last 1% of battery life, I asked George to text me when he was approaching. I saw a house not far off the road, so I ran to its front door and knocked loudly, desperately hoping for a safe place to wait for George. After a short delay, a man in his 40s who appeared to have just woken up cracked open the door. I explained my predicament and begged him to let me inside to charge my phone. After some hesitation, he fully opened the door and reluctantly allowed me in. I asked if he had an iPhone charger, and he said he'd look, showing me to the living room to wait. I remained seated, still clad in my nurse scrubs, wrestling with my emotions. The man reappeared from the kitchen and offered me a glass of water. Unbeknownst to him, a mirror in the living room reflected his movements in the kitchen. I watched him drop something into the water before bringing it to me. My instincts screamed in alarm, though the water itself appeared clear. I thanked him and accepted the glass, all while aware of the potential danger. As he returned to the kitchen, still looking for the charger, he asked me to recount the situation again. I feigned cooperation, pretending to sip the water while watching him still in the mirror. My heart pounded as I observed him filling a cup at the kitchen faucet, presumably to prepare another dose of whatever he'd added to the previous glass. He left my line of sight momentarily, but the sound of running water continued for an uncomfortably long time. When he finally returned with a fresh glass of water, I knew I couldn't take any chances. I rose abruptly from my seat and made a beeline for the front door, no longer willing to play along. My survival instincts had kicked in. Once outside, I retraced my steps down the driveway toward the road, feeling fear wash over me. 2 separate incidents involving 2 creeps on the same night were beyond belief. I walked cautiously along the road, concealing myself behind the cover of trees when I could. With my phone in hand, I sent George an updated location as my battery finally gave out. I waited anxiously, eyes scanning the road for any sign of familiar headlights. When he finally arrived, I dashed onto the road, frantically waving him down. Relief flooded over me as I climbed into his truck, and I poured out my ordeal in tears. George's anger surged as I recounted the night's events, mainly the sinister intentions of the man who had tried to sedate me with a drug in his home. As we approached my stranded car, the first creep in his truck had vanished into the night. George's and my suspicions were vindicated when my car was towed to the dealership the following day. It was discovered that the fuel line had been deliberately severed. I thanked my lucky stars that I had survived that chilling nightmare. The realization that I had narrowly escaped 2 potentially fatal threats in one night haunted me, leaving me profoundly shaken.
Subscribe.